Hello, everyone, and welcome to a beginner's guide of homeschooling with Sonlight. I'm so happy to be joined today by Judy, Christy, and Sandy. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but today we're going to be talking all about how you would start homeschooling with Sonlight. We know that some of you are veteran homeschoolers, some of you are new because your children are in kindergarten, and some of you are here because life sort of led you this way. So we're happy to have you. We're going to dive right in, but first let's start with introductions. Judy, why don't you give us a start?
Thanks, Steph. So I am a homeschooling mom of three now grown children who did Sonlight Curriculum all the way from kindergarten through high school. And now I have grandchildren who are getting to the age of being ready to maybe homeschool. I enjoyed thoroughly our experience as a family with Sonlight, and so much so that I'm privileged to also be part of the Sonlight team and have been working for Sonlight for a little over 20 years now. And so if you ever get a chance to visit a convention, which hopefully we're going to be able to do again next year, maybe I'll see you at one of those events.
That's true. All of these ladies joining me today, you will see it. You can see at conventions. They are our convention crew. So Christy, why don't you introduce?
Okay, so I'm Christy, and this is my 12th year of homeschooling with our 4 boys, and my oldest is a senior this year. I cannot believe that. The time has passed so quickly. He started with Sonlight in 1st grade. Before I had my own children, I started practicing with someone else's children overseas. And so I was actually encountered Sonlight for the first time and, overseas teaching other people's children. And then after I was married, we looked at all of the curriculum options and were overwhelmed. And that's one of the main reasons I love talking to Sonlighters and future Sonlighters is because I remember that overwhelmed feeling, and I like to help. I took a year and researched everything to death, and so anyway, I like to encourage people and just again, 4 children. We're doing middle school and high school this year. So
very good. Sandy?
I have 4 grown daughters now, but we homeschooled all the way through. I used a variety of different curricula for the first 7 years. And then once we found Sonlight, for the next 20 years, we used Sonlight exclusively. I don't do conferences as much anymore. I kind of do contract behind the scenes with Judy mostly. But I did
You're planning them.
20 years. Do what?
You're planning them.
I'm planning, yes. I make sure they get to their conferences.
Yes.
So it has been a wonderful journey for us, and we still talk about all the books.
Well, thank you. I'm Stephanie Rose. I'm the community manager at Sonlight. Let's jump in. So the first question we get a lot is, what is literature-based learning? And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like, what it is, and how Sonlight sort of fits in that category. I am down for whoever wants to start.
I'll start.
Okay.
Because I started with other curriculum, we had textbooks. And much of the literature was done in excerpts, just a little chapter here and there. What I loved was literature-based is the whole book. And as a result, you're doing historical fiction, you're doing historical fiction, you're doing nonfiction, you're doing biographies. You are getting a very large picture of what's going on in a time period rather than a little blurb. The books are carefully chosen. They're integrated for the time period, whereas many times when you're doing the textbook, it's an excerpt from this book and one from that book, and they're not related, and they're teaching a concept maybe, I'm not sure anymore, but it's not giving me information. And so I loved the change, and that's why I changed for the first 7 years all the time. And once I hit Sonlight for 20 years, we never looked over the fence.
And I think you make a really good point, Sandy, when you say you get to read the whole book. And the value of literature-based learning is that you're learning that information in context.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just memorizing dates and names and events and locations, but I'm actually reading an entire book that's taking the information that I want my kids to learn and putting it in context, in story form, and kids actually retain that information a whole lot longer.
Mm-hmm. I read an article. Oh, I'm sorry, Christy. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that we know from the New Testament that Jesus taught the ones he was with, the ones that were close to him, through meaningful, very meaningful and memorable stories. And so it's just a good teaching tool. You know, generations later, people knew these stories because they were shared in a story form. So, you know, whether we're learning about verbs or whether we're learning about microbes, when you have a story attached to it, it gives it this meaningful background. So we can tell how people's lives were affected. And instead of just having some historical event, you care about this character. So if you're talking about the potato famine, and then it moves on this long journey, and then they're starting over in this new place, you have the backdrop. And so it just makes it really meaningful. It's not just some boring thing you're learning in a textbook. And there's also this emotional connection. So as you pull for these characters together and you become absorbed in their stories, you care more, and then you want to learn more. And it's a huge motivation to pay more attention. People will say, I find history boring. But when you hear a story of someone, you get absorbed in that. And it's not just some boring, dull history. It's a collection of all of these stories that matter and that mattered to people. And and also it's easier to remember because there's a hook there. So when you start with, whether you start with the read aloud or the history, either way, you've heard about it. And my boys have even at times when we encounter something in the history that they've already heard about in the read aloud, they'll say, oh, this actually happened. And they have an enthusiasm about it because they've never heard this part of history and they don't know. So if they encountered it in the read aloud first, then they just think it's something that an author made up. But, and so anyway, it just gives you a hook to go back to. And then in future years, when you return to that, you have more and you can just build on that knowledge without memorizing a list of dates. You don't need to.
You brought up a good point too about the stories. I read an article that said that when you read facts, it goes in one side of your brain and you're just decoding what you're reading. But when you read a story, it uses more of your brain. So when you're doing the emotion, because you are engaging with the experience that you're reading about. So when you are talking about food, pizza, you know what that experience is, and it lights up another part of your brain. The same with the emotional part that Christy talked about, the same with the motor part. You know, if you're going to hit a line drive in baseball, all of those things work throughout the brain. And as a result, again, you're going to connect more because it's more than just the decoding. And Sonlight is very good with their books as far as you have readers that have children their age, the ones that are reading it, children their age, so that they can connect with them. But the connections are either with the characters in the book or between me as the reader with my children, or the connections are multiple areas.
Very good. Let's talk a little, that's all, I mean, it's just the natural curiosities that come from reading are, that's what Sonlight is built on. That's what literature-based is built on. So it's just great. Let's talk about a schoolroom. A lot of people maybe don't have extra space in their house, or this will be the first time they're homeschooling. Let's talk a little bit about how you organize all the books, because there are a lot of books, and we're going to talk about that later, and how you would set that up.
I hear people with very strong opinions about this. You have different camps. as with a lot of things in homeschool, you have people that say, oh, you absolutely need this, or you don't. So I think we've had routines that have varied through the years. And so I've been in homes with dreamy homeschool rooms that I've loved. And that works really well. And those are beautiful, and that may happen. And I think that can be great, but it's certainly not a must-have, I think, because we can accomplish what we need to with a well-organized bookshelf, or 10 bookshelves maybe, or a system that works well day to day. I think some important considerations that you may not think about starting out, something that I needed to think about was what I can hear when I'm trying to read aloud. We'll talk about later about when you're reading aloud on the couch or versus, at the table. But if you have any instruments in your home, yeah, we have an upright piano. We have, a keyboard with headphones, which are very important for homeschooling, I think, and multiple guitars. We have ukuleles and that recorder that we bought from Sonlight. And I don't think I've ever used the Sonlight Love to Learn guarantee, but the recorder made me strongly consider it because that was quite the instrument. Maybe my least favorite instrument we've had in the house. I don't know. But they can be great. You can learn some great things about music with them, just not when you're trying to read aloud. So reading aloud near a table where others are doing table time and talking with each other might work well when they're young and you need to keep an eye on people. But as they get older and they're teenagers and they're trying to be funny and interrupting 18,000 times, then you might want to find a different place. And so every year changes for us. It just does. But we just always at the beginning of the year think through what this year holds, what our situation is, what our house layout is right now, and what's going to work well to get things done.
I think for us, when we were homeschooling, we live in a very small house. And so there wasn't extra space to have a schoolroom, so to speak. But one thing I think you absolutely have to have is bookshelves. It's really tough to do a literature-based curriculum without bookshelves. So we had a standing joke in our house about how many my husband needed to build each year so that we could continue to build our Sonlight library.
Yeah.
And Christy, you mentioned that Love to Learn guarantee, and I don't want to let that go by without saying that is one of the most very valuable things about Sonlight Curriculum that I don't believe you'll find any other curriculum on the market has. That Love to Learn guarantee is when you purchase a package from Sonlight, you have a whole year from the date of your purchase to try half of that program. So it's a 36-week scheduled program. So you get to use up through week 18. You can read the books, you can write in the workbooks, you can dog ear the pages, you can mark in the instructor's guide. And if you get to the end of that 18 weeks and find that this is just not a good fit for our family, then you box it back up and you ship it back to Sonlight, and they will give you back 100% of your purchase price, which is a huge safety net, especially for people who are just starting out and this is their first year and they have no idea what's going to work with their family. And so I think that guarantee is kind of a reassurance.
I have to put another vote in for shelves. I'm very fortunate that the house we're in now, I have lots of shelves, but in the first house, it was very small. So I would make sure that the shelves I used had just that year's work on it. Everything else was in tubs, labeled, put away for another child coming up. As they get older, though, you talk about where to do it. My older children would end up reading their literature in their room while I was reading out loud to the younger children. And then they would switch out their book when they were done, except many times they loved their book so much they would not give it back. And I had to repurchase a lot of books. But I can't think of anything I'd rather spend my money on for my children than letting them start their own library.
Very true. Very true. So there's a lot that goes into Sonlight. As we've sort of mentioned, you have a lot of books, and we at Sonlight have something called the Instructor's Guide. So it helps everyone, keep everything organized and get everything done. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about your experience with the Instructor's Guide. I'm going to show one while you guys are talking. And so yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Instructor's Guide. It comes in this giant binder.
Well, I can give a little bit of information, first of all, about other kinds of instructor's guides, because I started with other companies. And I did a hands-on curriculum one time. I never knew if I was going too fast or too slow. I never knew a real direction. They had book title selection or suggestions, but I really didn't know age-wise or what it would fit. I couldn't always find them, and it just left me feeling very scattered. But then I went to a textbook, and with that one, I do know what they have, but I don't know what they're learning. I'm not really learning it with them because I'm spending all my time grading their workbooks. And then I realized when I have 3 children in school age, I would be grading 3 different levels of every subject. So I didn't really get to have a relationship. It was just get your work done. It wasn't a lot of fun. So when I went to Sonlight, the instructor's guide didn't quite look like that. It was just a schedule. But even that, everything was integrated by then. And then they started adding all these things. And I'll let somebody else talk about all the wonderful things they've added to it.
Stephanie, did you want?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to show this a little bit. And then I don't know what week I'm on because I can't really see it, but
you're on week 10.
Week 10. So this is what it looks like, and it's divided into different subjects, and it gives you exactly what you should be doing for the week.
An instructor's guide really is Sonlight. I mean, you can go to the library and get books and have lots of good discussion around literature. But that instructor's guide is what makes Sonlight work, because it takes all of that literature and puts it all together in a schedule. So you know from one day to the next exactly how many pages you need to read. There are discussion and comprehension questions. There's vocabulary built in. There are notes for mom and dad, maybe some little extra tidbits that they can choose to add into the day's discussion. If you're looking at our science instructor's guide or our language arts, there's activity sheets. So students actually get to do something with what they've learned. They can do some dictation, or that's if you're doing a lower level and you're doing
this
phonics.
one I think is kindergarten.
Yep, you can learn how to write letters. And the really nice thing is, I mean, that's a big, massive binder. You can see Stephanie's doing a little weightlifting there. I usually tell people that's like a filing cabinet. So that's your entire school year. Go to a local store, a Walmart or a Target or whatever, and get yourself a 1-inch 3-ring binder and pull out 1 or 2 weeks at a time. And that becomes your working binder, so that you're not hauling that monster binder around all the time. And it's a little more doable that way.
Mm-hmm. I think the instructor's guide, along with keeping us organized and moving us forward, it is 30 years of Sonlight seeing what works for families and then taking that experience and giving it to you when you're just starting out. So, when I was just starting out, I have used before briefly one other program, and I remember losing half a day one day trying to figure something out. And the good thing about Sonlight is that every year they update these instructor's guides and they take feedback. They offer a website to you. If you find something, communicate back to us. And so you can help the Sonlight community. And I've always enjoyed that you can be a part of this, like save some other moms some time, this page is not correct here or there, and they find that. Maybe it's an error on the part of the book that Sonlight did not publish. And so they find that out so that you're not giving your children incorrect information. And every book out there has, an error here or there. And so Sonlight will let you know that and give you that heads up. And so I've always appreciated the time saving, the fact that it keeps our pacing on time, it keeps us organized. And I'm just going to say a word about organizing with the instructor's guide. I start every new program with a shelf that's in order for the year for every program. So just left to right, I take the book list from my instructor's guide and I put it all in order on day one. So when I hear moms that are overwhelmed, on day one, you can have every book in order that you need because Sonlight gives you the information and the tools to do that. And so you can see where you're going throughout. As I move through my shelf, I can see, the progress we're making, and visually, I can see what's left. And also, I have a bin that I keep in everything for the day. I'm going to show you guys. This is what I've used for years. It's just a bin that's just like this. There's no magic to it. Yours might be prettier than mine, but we've used them for years and they work. But I put everything I need for the day in a bin like this for each student. And when they're little and we're going to piano lessons, they can grab these and take them with us. Now that they're older, if everybody's noisy downstairs and they say, can we read in your room? And I say, sure, grab the bin, and they grab it and we go upstairs and read. So just having something like this, it's not that overwhelming. You can fit everything you need in a bin like this for the day. And then one thing that I do with my instructor's guide, it has these neat maps that I love, and you can use them like a file folder, and you can have what you need for the day and just put it right inside this. And then you don't have to go scrambling for the maps that you need. And these are nicely laminated where you can, and everything's marked in your instructor's guide. So you know exactly where to go in which map. They're all labeled in a very organized way. And so it's it's a cinch. This goes in my bin. And so I can do my geography lesson wherever I am and do my reading. And it's just not as overwhelming that way.
The other thing too is if you live in a state where you are required by homeschool regulations to keep track of what you're doing, or have some sort of report that you have to file regularly, that schedule that Stephanie showed you is so nice, because in each one of those boxes down in the corner, when you finish the assignment, you can pencil in a date or just check off the assignment. And so now you have a week by week, day by day demonstration or proof of the work that you've done if your state homeschool regulations require that kind of documentation.
Absolutely. And down here, you can see these are the talking points that you might have with your child and the additional lessons that you would have. So when Christy slipped that into her map, it's because you might be talking about both sides. You might be, I wanted to show you this. So there's an entire section for a timeline and a map, and everything is laid out so you can start to piece together a lot of what you're learning over the years too. In your timeline on your map, you can go back and say, I already learned about this location when I was in kindergarten. Now I'm in 4th grade, or whatever. So it's definitely, you're starting to connect things. You're starting to connect with the world as you read great books. And
we have samples of those on our website too. You can look at 3 weeks worth of every instructor's guide we carry at no cost. So it's kind of cool to be able to get a sample and check it out before you make a decision.
Yeah, and I think it's Sonlight/instructor's guide, if I remember.
Well, you'll also notice that when you look at that instructor's guide now, not so much for kindergarten, but for the other years, if you look down, you'll see, oh, this is American Revolution. This is American Revolution. This is, so your read alouds, your readers, and your history are all on the same time period. They did all the work integrating it for us.
Absolutely. So that's a look into our instructor's guide. That's going to help you get everything done, make sure that you're following along. That is sort of the heart of Sonlight. You know, when you think about the books and everything, that's putting it all together. So let's talk a little bit about couch and table subjects. We divide, at Sonlight, we sort of divide couch and table subjects, and this allows you to maybe divide your day, or maybe it helps you guide how you're going to teach multiple children in different ages. But let's talk a little bit about what all that means. Sandy, you want to start?
I'll start with the couch. The couch would be, and we literally sat on the couch. We did our Bible, we did our history, we did our read alouds together, and some science. We will read. Experiments will be elsewhere, but we would do the reading there. This is a good area for combining. And let me just make a real quick point. When people think, how can I combine my children? I say, do you watch the same movies as a family? If you watch the same movies and your children are all different ages, they get what they get at that point. In fact, you can even have two children the same age and they will get different items, or different parts of a movie will affect them differently. And so it's the same with books. Everybody will get something different. In fact, when I read a book a second time, I get something different out of it. So that's why you can combine with your children. So we would do our Bible, our history, our read alouds on the couch. Obviously, table subjects would be math and spelling and grammar and the things you usually sit at the table for.
Mm-hmm. We
Right.
get a lot of questions.
Table subjects are those skill-based subjects. So every student probably has their own level for those subjects. Sorry, Christy.
Yes, I was just going to say that we get a lot of questions about how to divide the day between table time and couch time and how to fit it all in together. And one thing that I consider is especially when my children were very young, I wanted to nurture my little guys early in the day. So I might spend some concentrated time with my older guys while we might do Bible together first. And then I would branch off and tend to spend time with my youngest guys first and just fill up their cup. And then sometimes there would be more leeway for me to spend time with the older guys one-on-one after that. But while I was working with my younger children, then the older children could do independent work at the table. So they might start off with anything that they could do independently. It might be handwriting or explode the code or maybe vocabulary, wordly wise, any of those subjects. And they felt confident and felt kind of grown up that they could do, even in the early grades, I might have them do a couple of lines of handwriting. I'm not leaving them for, a really long time, but I'm just reading short stories with my younger guys. And then I would work with the older guys that were at the table. I might bring the younger guys and get them started, and their work isn't going to last as long, but then they could go and take a break while I do individual time, couch time with my older guys. So you can play with the flow of how it works best for you. But I just really thought about dividing up my time and nurturing my little guys first, and having time, one-on-one time with them, and then moving through the day. And they were a lot more cooperative, let's say, when I'd already spent a good, invested time with them.
Very good. Judy, do you want to talk a little bit about how you divided your day?
Sure. Well, we did something very similar to what Christy did. We started the day with Bible. When our kids were eating breakfast, we just felt like that laid a good foundation for the rest of the day, and maybe helped to deal with ornery or grouchy attitudes up front instead of having to deal with them later in the day. And for much of the time that we were homeschooling our kids, my husband worked a graveyard shift. And so he would come home in the morning. He was our math teacher. And so in order to get math in before Dad fell asleep at the table, we would do that right after Bible in the morning. And then we actually learned to be a very quiet household because, like I said, our house is tiny. So Dad was sleeping, and so we would do a lot of our couch subjects or our table subjects in another room so that we weren't disturbing him. But I think the thing that's nice about homeschooling in general and with Sonlight is you have that flexibility. Your life is going to change year to year, sometimes day to day or week to week. And so you have the flexibility to either grab that bin that Christy showed you and take it with you because you have to go to the doctor's office, or you can do stuff at home, and you just never know. But it's nice to have that flexibility. And I think the other thing that's really nice with Sonlight is because it's so flexible and because there is that literature-based component, those couch subjects, you don't have to buy a separate program for every child. And if you have a large family, that can get to be very pricey after a while. But like Sandy mentioned, because literature is not written to a single age or a single grade, you can actually share your history and your Bible and your read-alouds and have all your kids listen in together and discuss together. And not only does that save you money on your homeschool curriculum, but it does an amazing thing that you don't realize until later on, and that is it builds wonderful relationships between your kids and your family as a whole.
That's a very good point, Judy. A lot of our books are meant to start conversation. And when you have those conversations with your children, if you facilitate those conversations, you can guide them into a lot of different paths. You can, if they are asking questions and they're interested in something, you can help facilitate and nurture that interest. You can have really hard conversations and really funny conversations, and it really does change the dynamic of your family when you're having those conversations. I also want to mention that I've heard people read, their read-alouds are their bedtime stories. They move those to the end of the day, and that's when they do it. Or we go to the park and we take the book with us, or we're at the doctor's office, like Christy was saying, or you're in the car, you have your older one read to your younger one. That counts too. That is, I am guilty of that one. I'm always like, here is the book. Will you read that to this one? It works. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps them bond as well. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. There are a ton of blogs out there. If you're not familiar with the Sonlight blog, it's blog.sonlight.com. There's a ton of tips out there. So you can definitely look and see how different people are using the books, reading aloud, using the curriculum, all kinds of things. So definitely use that resource. Speaking of all the books, we have a lot. Do you really have to read them all out loud? And how do you fit those in without losing your voice? So let's talk a little bit about tips and tricks. I think I got a little ahead of myself there, but I will let you guys talk about your personal experience.
Well, let me just say that when you start, it builds. A kindergartner is not going to have 6 chapters read to them. Their chapters are very short. And so usually if you have multiple children and we don't usually recommend that you do any more than 2 history Bible literatures. So you read the younger ones and they go quicker than an older one. Our read-alouds stop about 7th, 8th grade. It just depends on which year you're using. However, I read them all because I loved them. In fact, it's the read-alouds that cause so much of the discussion. And the read-alouds is where they learn my heart, how I work through things, and it helped me learn their heart. What were they scared of? What were they worried about? Or what were they thinking at all? And so we read them all. But I also read all of the history spine. Now, this is just me. I read the main history spine that went through the whole year. But as they got older, I would have them read their own supplemental history books that go with it. It might be a biography that was put in related to what we're learning. But sometimes there are books that you don't like. They don't fit your family, and it's okay to pull it out. So you have permission.
A lot of people need to hear that, Sandy.
Yes.
Yes, I hear people being concerned about losing your voice, but like Sandy said, you're building up through time. And with my youngest, when we started, I remember one of the first books in first grade. I can only remember one book that I felt like I might lose my voice. And it was a book that had these long run-on sentences. It was a little girl talking, and she was very excited. And it was stream of consciousness almost. So like a little girl would speak. And it was hard to find a place to breathe in the sentence because they were so long. And thankfully Sonlight made that a reader the year after I finished it. But you can do that yourself. You have it's very flexible. You can make a read aloud a reader, or you can make a reader a read aloud. You have the ability to move that around however you need to. There have been times that I will start a book with my children and get them engaged where they can't wait for the next chapter, and then I've handed it over to them and let them finish it. That's been something I've done before, here or there. But I do enjoy the read aloud time. And I know a lot of people now, I hear a lot about recordings of books. For example, Story of the World, my boys have that book that they can look at and read, but we also ordered from Sonlight the recordings where you can listen. They have a player in their room and they can put that on and listen to it and read those. And that created a little time for me. That's in GHW frame of time in the levels. And that just gave me time for my younger, and my high schooler. And so my middle guys use that recording. We haven't used a lot of those recordings because I enjoy talking with them so much about the books that we're reading and having that discussion time. So I enjoy it. And it has never been a problem with losing my voice because I've built up to it over time. And I think I'm also better at reading aloud than when we first started, because I've had all of these years of reading to my children. I feel like my oldest child, it was great, but my youngest child gets a better version of each book because I've read it all these years, and I think I'm better at it now. So over time, I think we grow as well, and this is one of the ways. So it's a growing experience for mom too.
Mom doesn't have to be the only one that reads either.
Right, that's true. Yeah. I have had older children read to my younger children. I've also broken it up, reading in the morning and then finishing at night, because sometimes you're in the middle of a chapter and you're thinking, I cannot read another sentence. I'm exhausted. It's time. You're losing their attention. From time to time that happens. I don't know if that happens to anyone else, but it happens to me that everybody's not with me, and I realize it, and I've tried all the things to get them with me and it's not working. So then I might move to, okay, we're going to take a break, we're going to have a snack, and then we'll come back and do this later, or even at the end of the day at bedtime. Very flexible.
Yeah. Judy, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think it's just all very good ideas. I think we have to realize that we're not the only ones that have to read. Dad used to read bedtime stories at our house, and so and it's a marvelous experience for older siblings to read to younger kids. It really is.
We have one Sonlighter who she has a YouTube page. Anyway, I was watching her video and she said, she has 11 children. She said, I started recording my own voice for my own children because I still want to be the person that reads to them, but there's a lot of them. So she started reading the older ones. So as the younger ones continue to grow, I thought, genius. Yes. So anyway, I want you each to share one or two of your favorite Sonlight memories. Let's end on that note. Sandy, why don't you start?
This is not a memory. This is just one thing I need to bring up. I learned so much each year. I mean, I would pat myself on the back that, wow, I just learned about whatever. Where was my education prior to this? So that has been the blessing with this. Um, my favorite memories are related to individual books. I told you we used something different the first 7 years. So when my 7th grader started with Sonlight, she prior to this was reading books out of the church library, little thin little books. And she had to read Anne of Green Gables. Oh my goodness, it was so hard for her. The sentence structure is complex and it's a long book, and she complained and complained, and I just had to keep encouraging her to read through it, and she eventually finished it, maybe a little longer than the time that was scheduled. Then the next book, we had a little bit of that, but not as much. And by the end of the 3rd book, she came to me and she said, I can never go back to those books again in the library. Why not? She said, I now know, and this is quoting her, I now know what good literature is. She said, it's characters, and there's development of those characters, and there's plots and subplots. Whereas in those little books, it was the same character throughout the whole book in every scene. But she said there was so much going on, and that made a huge difference to her. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when she went to college, she said, again, she was a slower reader. She would say things like there are too many books. But when she got to college, she said, thank you for using Sonlight. I said, why? She said, because now I know what you mean about being well-rounded. I've either read the book or the subject matter. I can talk to my professors, and my peers have no clue. So, and let me tell you one more little quick one. I have another daughter who, she loved books greatly, and she was reading Red Badge of Courage, and she really disliked that book a lot. She would tell me constantly, I don't like this book, I don't. And at the end of the book, she said, can I have this in hardbound? That meant she wanted her own copy for the library. And I said, why? You didn't even like the book. She said, I loved the writing style. And I thought, wow, if you can tell that difference. My girls read all the time. They carry books with them all the time. And I have four daughters. They carry books all the time, all genre. Thank you, Sonlight.
Very good. Christy?
I'm going to tell you about one from early years and then later years. So my favorite story in the early years is when my youngest was about 3 years old, and I was just loving life homeschooling because we had previously not, done some other options before we started homeschooling. And so I was getting to see the value of having a preschooler who wasn't being rushed through using the bathroom so that we could get in the car and go or do what we needed to do. And so I was finding myself standing outside the door while he's swinging his feet on the toilet and singing, and I'm tearing up in the hallway, just so thankful that Sawyer can, live life this way. And so we're giving a gift to our 3-year-olds when we're doing this whole world that we've changed and this whole new thing that we're doing. And so anyway, he's at the table. We've already started our day. He's eased into his day, and his hair's all messed up at the table. And we're reading that book I was talking about earlier that has the long sentences, and everybody's into it. Everybody's engaged. And I didn't know Sawyer was even listening, really. And I'm reading this story where in the storyline, a dog is missing. And so we're reading this story, and it's just, and there's, it's building up, and Sawyer jumps up in his chair, and he says, I found the dog. And he's like the hero here because he sees the dog on the, he was so young that he thought he found the dog because it was on the cover of the book. And he was so excited. But the cool part about that is that he was 3 years old, but he was engaged enough to know the storyline. And he was listening where he was listening. I wasn't trying to find Legos for him to play with and pull him in, or, you can do that, but you can also just know and relax and know that they're going to lean in and start listening. Everybody in the house starts doing that. Even my husband starts doing that when he's at home. He's like, oh, don't read that book until I'm here, So anyway, I love that story. I think it just shows how for our family, we all remember that memory except for Sawyer, and he laughs about it. And when he eventually read that book, when he was old enough to, he brought it to me and said, "This is the best book in the world." He loved it. And he didn't remember it, obviously, but he was getting attention span. You know, his attention span was growing through that. And there were so many gifts that we're giving our children when we're reading aloud in the home. And then the other is recently I shared this on one of our Sonlight groups online about my oldest son, Caleb. He was registering for a dual enrollment class, and in the registration, he was doing his security questions, and he wanted me to look over it and just review a few things before he submitted his login information. He wanted me to check something that he'd written on something. And he said, "Hey, did you notice the security question?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Go back and look." And so I looked, and there was a drop-down menu of all the security questions. We all know what that's like to choose those. And it said favorite teacher. And it had my their last name, and it had our last name. And I was like, and he said, and he put his arm around me. My big 17-year-old put his arm around me, and he said, "You know, you've taught me more than just lessons. You've taught me more than," I can't remember exact wording, but he said, "You've taught me so much more than anyone." And it was a huge moment in my life. Obviously, a favorite memory. Just the bond that through all of these years he recognizes, and just wanted to communicate that to me on a random Tuesday or whatever. So.
Oh,
Huge.
yes, absolutely. Judy?
I think a couple things that I recall, even all the years later. One time someone said to me, "Why would you choose to homeschool? Why would you not just put the kids on the bus and give yourself some freedom during the day?" And I said, "You know, this may sound funny, but the most important thing to me at that time was I want to be the one that teaches my children how to read. I want to be the one that's there for that moment when they realize, when they're reading those little phonetic readers that Sonlight provides, that all of a sudden they're doing it on their own and they don't have to stop and ask for help." And one of my kids was a struggling reader, and that child really didn't learn to read independently until they were 7 or 8 years old. And all of those years of struggle, had I not been able to be there the day that that child picked up a book and looked at me and said, "I can read this," I just can't imagine setting that aside or giving that privilege to someone else. And I think the other one was very similar to what Christy shared. I was reading with my 2 older girls sitting on the couch, and we were reading something from Greek history. You know, those Greek guys had those names that were like 17 syllables long and really hard to pronounce. And we were reading a story about this Greek messenger who had run miles and miles and miles to bring a message to somebody important. So we finished reading that book. And of course, my youngest was sitting over in the corner playing Legos, making truck sounds and all the sounds that little boys make, and not paying attention at all, or so I thought. And at that time, we tried to make it a point to have dinner all together. And so that night at dinner, Daddy looked around and said to the kids, "So what did you learn today?" And my then 3 or 4-year-old popped up and said, "I learned about this really cool guy, and his name was," and he rattled off this multiple syllable name, and he was Greek, and he ran and took the message to the really important guy. And I sat there with my mouth hanging open because he wasn't listening, he was playing. And yet I think literature-based learning gives you that privilege of kids absorbing and remembering and hanging on to those things, even when they weren't the ones that were the focus of the lesson.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you guys so much for sharing during this session. This has been a beginner's guide to homeschooling with Sonlight. Thank you, Sandy, Christy, and Judy.
Thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.